Dean Martin stopped his show for a dying stuntman, the moment that made John Wayne call him a hero. The music was mid-note when Dean Martin froze, staring past the spotlight at something going terribly wrong. A man lay crumpled beyond the curtains, gasping, while producers signaled to keep rolling. Millions were watching. One choice could ruin a career, or save a life. And then Dean did something no one expected. Where are you watching from tonight? In the early 1960s, Lev television ran on an unspoken rule. The show must go on, no matter what. Sponsors paid fortunes for airtime, networks feared dead air more than scandal, and performers learned to smile through anything. That night, Dean Martin was hosting a variety program built on polish and control. Cameras glided, laughter cues blinked, and the audience expected charm on schedule. Behind that smooth surface lived another rule: harsher and quieter stuntmen were replaceable. They fell, burned, crashed so stars could look fearless. If one went down, assistants dragged him out and the music swelled louder. Dean knew this. Everyone did. The stakes were invisible to viewers but crushing backstage. A delay meant angry executives, furious sponsors, headlines questioning professionalism. Dean's career, already carefully rebuilt after personal losses and industry feuds, balanced on reputation. He was labeled relaxed, maybe careless, certainly not serious. That label hid how closely he watched people. As the band hit a familiar rhythm, a stunt meant to look dangerous but controlled went wrong off camera. A thud echoed wrong, a scream cut short. Dean saw producers glance away, pretending nothing happened. In that moment, the world's rules pressed in: ignore it, finish strong, protect the show. What mattered wasn't applause. It was whether anyone would break those rules. The man on the floor wasn't a headline name. He was a veteran stuntman who doubled for cowboys and war heroes, absorbing punishment so others could look brave. His job demanded silence about pain. Contracts rarely mentioned safety beyond vague promises. Injuries were badges, not warnings. That night, a mistimed landing crushed his chest against steel rigging. Breathing became work. Each gasp sounded thinner than the last. Stagehands hovered, torn between protocol and panic. The director's voice crackled in headsets, ordering cameras to stay wide, keep Dean centered. Viewers would never know. The audience laughed on cue, unaware of the cost, just beyond the curtains. Dean, however, felt the shift. Years in clubs taught him when a room changed temperature. His eyes tracked the hurried footsteps, the clenched jaws. He caught a glimpse of the stuntman's face. A Shen eyes pleading not for fame but for air. Dean understood stakes instinctively: life versus optics. If he stopped the show, he'd be blamed for chaos. If he didn't, he'd be complicit. The power imbalance was clear. A star could choose. A stuntman couldn't. In that imbalance lived the real drama. Dean's smile stayed fixed but his body leaned toward the darkness, listening. The band kept playing. The rule said continue. Conscience said act. Silence stretched, louder than music, daring him to decide which rule mattered. Television audiences believed what they saw. Effortless glamour, risk neatly packaged. They didn't see the bargain underneath. For every laugh, someone else bled quietly. That night mattered because it exposed that bargain in real time. Dean Martin stood at the intersection of entertainment and humanity, where choices become legends or regrets. The producers trusted momentum. Sponsors trusted ratings. The network trusted control. None of them trusted interruption. The man dying backstage trusted nothing except the thin hope someone important would notice. Dean had lived long enough to recognize moments that define you. Not the big premieres or box office numbers, but the seconds when nobody tells you what to do. He remembered friends lost to accidents brushed off as part of the business. He remembered promises to families that sounded hollow. This wasn't abstract morality. It was immediate. The audience laughed again, unaware their joy rode on someone else's breath. Dean felt anger rise, not loud but focused. Anger at the system that made invisibility normal. The stakes were personal too. He was tired of being underestimated. Stopping the show would confirm every stereotype about him being unreliable. Continuing would confirm something worse. That success had dulled his empathy. The clock ticked. The band watched him for cues. The director counted seconds. History waits on such pauses. This one would decide whether the night became another forgotten broadcast or a story told decades later, whispered with respect. Dean Martin's past didn't advertise courage. Born Dino Crossetti, he grew up learning to read rooms quickly, to survive with humor and song. He'd seen hardship early, family struggles, odd jobs, nights where talent barely paid rent. Those years taught him that dignity often hides behind jokes. Fame came later unevenly, and with it came assumptions. People thought he drifted, coasted, let others steer. They missed how deliberate he was about loyalty. Offstage, Dean remembered names. He tipped generously. He listened. He knew who did the dangerous work without applause. His partnership with Jerry Lewis taught him about balance and fallout. When that partnership ended publicly, Dean absorbed the criticism quietly, rebuilding step by step. That rebuilding forged patience. He learned when to smile and when to stop smiling. He also learned that courage doesn't announce itself, it waits. By the time he stood on that stage, Dean had buried friends and buried versions of himself. He understood fragility beneath bravado. The industry rewarded those who pretended not to see it. Dean saw it anyway. He carried that seeing like a private oath. The stuntman's face triggered memories of men he'd watched disappear after injuries, their names fading as quickly as applause. Dean's strength wasn't loud defiance. It was resolve formed by accumulation. Small kindnesses practiced over years prepare you for big decisions when they arrive unannounced. Dean's mindset that night wasn't heroic, it was practical. He believed shows existed for people, not the other way around. That belief put him at odds with an industry obsessed with schedules. He'd learned in nightclubs that control isn't volume, it's timing. When to pause a song, when to let silence speak. He also believed respect flowed downward. If a star modeled it, others followed. If not, cruelty spread. As he watched assistants hover uselessly, he recognized fear masquerading as professionalism. No one wanted to be responsible for stopping the machine. Dean understood responsibility differently. It meant accepting consequences so someone else didn't have to. He'd done it in quieter ways before, calling off bits that humiliated guests, shielding crew from blame. Those moments never made headlines. This one might. He felt the weight of cameras, the certainty that any deviation would be dissected. He breathed slowly, anchoring himself. Inner strength, for Dean, looked like calm refusal. He didn't need to shout, he needed to decide. The bandleader glanced at him, confused. Dean met his eyes and held them. That look carried a message learned over decades: follow me. Dean wasn't thinking about John Wayne or legends. He was thinking about a man's next breath, and whether his own silence would steal it. There's a misconception that courage arrives fully formed. Often it's assembled from habits. Dean's habit was noticing. He noticed when a joke went too far, when a waiter was ignored, when a crew member worked injured. Those notices built a ledger. That night the ledger demanded payment. Dean also knew how power works publicly. He knew a star's pause could force others to pause. He knew that if he spoke plainly, authority would shift, but he also knew that once he crossed that line he couldn't retreat. The industry punishes uncertainty more than dissent. He ran through outcomes quickly. Worst case, executives fume, sponsors complain, press mocks. Best case, a man lives. That calculation wasn't complicated. What complicated it was fear of being alone in the decision. Courage is easier with allies. Dean didn't wait for them. He trusted that integrity attracts support after the fact. His jaw set. He felt oddly peaceful. This was why he'd survived long enough to stand here. The stuntman's breathing rattled behind the curtain. Dean felt time compress. He adjusted the microphone, not to speak yet but to claim space. The audience leaned forward, sensing a shift. The rules were about to change, and Dean was ready to be blamed for it. The first warning came subtle. A stage manager rushed close, whispering urgently, "We've got it handled, keep going." Dean nodded without agreeing. The second warning came sharper. The director's voice cut through the earpiece, tense, counting beats. "Don't stop, we'll fix it." The fix meant concealment. Dean felt pressure wrap around him like a suit too tight. The band hesitated, missing a cue. The laughter track faltered. Dean's heart rate stayed steady. He glanced again toward the wings. Medics hadn't arrived. That told him everything. The third warning wasn't spoken. It was the look from an executive seated front row, eyes hard, reminding him who paid the bills. Fear spreads quietly. Crew members avoided eye contact. No one wanted to be the reason the night went wrong. Dean recognized that fear because he'd felt it before years earlier when standing up cost him work. He hadn't broken then. He wouldn't now. The escalation was complete: whisper, order, glare. The system had done its job. All that remained was compliance. Dean took a step forward, then another, moving away from his mark. That alone broke protocol. The audience murmured. The band stopped. Silence fell heavy and undeniable. Dean had created a moment the system couldn't ignore. As silence spread, panic sharpened backstage. Someone hissed, "What are you doing?" Dean didn't answer. He turned his body fully toward the wings, an unmistakable signal. The audience followed his gaze. Curiosity replaced laughter. Dean raised a hand, not dramatically, just enough. The gesture said wait. He wasn't performing now. He was leading. The pressure intensified. A producer stepped forward, face flushed, gesturing frantically to resume. Dean shook his head once. That single motion carried authority earned over decades. It said no final. The stuntman coughed, a wet sound that cut through the quiet. Dean heard it and felt his resolve harden. He spoke into the microphone, voice low. "We're gonna pause." He didn't explain yet. He didn't justify. He paused. That pause was power. Audience members leaned in, some standing. Cameras, uncertain, stayed rolling. The escalation had crossed a threshold. There was no hiding now. Dean sensed fear in others morphing into something else, relief. Someone had taken responsibility. Medics finally appeared, rushing with equipment. The director swore, then went quiet. Control had shifted. Dean watched the stretcher roll in. He stepped aside, clearing space, making the emergency visible. The audience gasped. The truth was out. With the emergency exposed, the system tried to reassert itself. A producer whispered about commercials, about damage control. Dean ignored him. The bandleader waited, hands hovering. The audience was no longer passive. They were witnesses. That changed everything. Dean knew escalation ends when someone reframes the narrative. He did it simply. "A man needs help," he said. No embellishment. No drama. The words landed harder than any monologue. Applause didn't come. Respect did. The medics worked quickly, oxygen hissing. The stuntman's eyes found Dean's. Fear flickered, then gratitude. Dean nodded, steady. The fear that others felt began to dissolve. When someone acts decisively, uncertainty loosens its grip. The escalation that had threatened to crush Dean now protected him. It's harder to argue with humanity once it's visible. Cameras captured the stretcher moving. This wasn't chaos. It was care. Dean stood still, hands clasped, refusing to fill the space with jokes. That restraint mattered. Silence honored the moment. The director realized the truth too late. Stopping had become the only professional choice. The audience began to clap softly. Not for entertainment, but for life. The escalation resolved into clarity. The show had stopped. A man might live. The event night shifted tone completely. Under bright lights, reality intruded. Dean remained on stage, present but unobtrusive, allowing medics to work. He answered no questions. He made no speeches. That absence of performance grounded the moment. Viewers at home leaned closer to screens, sensing authenticity. The visible threat wasn't spectacle, it was fragility. Dean watched the medics' faces, reading cues. When they lifted the stretcher, he stepped forward again. "We'll wait," he said quietly. That was all. The band stayed silent. The audience complied. Minutes stretched. In live television, minutes are eternity. Yet no one complained. Something deeper held them. Dean felt a strange calm settle. This was how things should be when someone is hurt. Time rearranges itself. The medics signaled they were moving the stuntman out. As the stretcher passed, Dean touched the man's shoulder briefly. Not for cameras. For connection. The stuntman squeezed weakly. That squeeze was the emotional trigger Dean would carry forever. The director whispered about cutting to commercial. Dean nodded, but added, "When they're ready." Authority acknowledged. The visible threat receded as the stretcher disappeared. But the emotional weight remained, heavy and shared. Dean returned to center stage, not to resume jokes, but to acknowledge truth. "Thank you for your patience," he said, his voice caught just enough. The audience responded with sustained applause, not loud, but unwavering. As commercials rolled, backstage energy was electric. Executives argued in hushed tones. Some blamed Dean, others quietly defended him. Sponsors called. Phones rang. Dean sat on a folding chair, hands folded, breathing evenly. He didn't pace, he didn't apologize. He waited for information. A medic returned, giving a brief update. The stuntman was alive, critical, en route to the hospital. Dean closed his eyes for a moment. Relief mixed with dread. Alive meant hope. Critical meant uncertainty. The show resumed eventually, but the tone was different. Dean kept it light without trivializing what happened. He threaded humor carefully, allowing space. The audience followed his lead. That sensitivity was the real performance. Viewers felt respected. When the broadcast ended, applause lingered. Dean didn't take a bow. He walked offstage toward the hospital. Cameras didn't follow. That choice mattered. The visible threat had passed, but the emotional trigger remained unresolved. Dean needed to know more. He needed to see the man. That night became less about ratings and more about consequence. The industry would analyze numbers. Dean measured success differently. He'd chosen interruption over illusion. Now he would face whatever came next. The genius reaction wasn't a clever line. It was restraint, timing, and refusal to pretend. The power flip had occurred quietly, decisively. Authority now answered to empathy. At the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced spotlights. Dean sat beside the stuntman's bed, listening to machines. The man was conscious briefly. "Thought I was done," he whispered. Dean leaned in. "Not tonight," he replied. "No speeches. Just presence." Doctors explained injuries, risks, the thin margin. Dean nodded, absorbing details. He asked practical questions. Insurance, family, work. The answers revealed familiar gaps. Promises that didn't quite cover reality. Dean felt anger again, sharper now. He left instructions quietly, calling contacts, arranging support. This was where power could do good without applause. By morning, word had spread. Industry whispers turned into conversations. Some framed the stoppage as reckless. Others framed it as human. The visible threat had become a moral test. Dean returned home exhausted, mind replaying the squeeze of a hand. Sleep didn't come easily. He wondered if he'd done enough. The next day calls came. Some warned him about consequences. He listened politely, he didn't argue, he waited. The genius reaction was still unfolding. The true flip of power happens over time when narratives settle. Dean trusted that truth exposed calmly would hold. Public confrontation arrived unexpectedly. At a studio meeting, an executive questioned Dean's judgment in front of peers. The room stiffened. Dean listened, then spoke evenly. "If it were your brother," he said, "you'd want us to stop." The simplicity disarmed the argument. No one countered. The power shifted again. The audience reaction mattered too. Letters poured in praising the pause. Viewers recognized integrity when they saw it. Networks pay attention to that. The Stuntmen's union spoke up, citing the incident as proof of needed reforms. Dean didn't take credit. He declined interviews that framed him as a savior. He redirected focus to safety. That restraint amplified his influence. The confrontation transformed into momentum. Policies were reviewed, protocols adjusted. Quietly, standards improved. The genius wasn't grandstanding, it was consistency. Dean maintained the same calm stance everywhere. When pressed for drama, he refused. "We did what anyone should," he said. That phrase unsettled people who preferred heroes to obligations. It also empowered others to act. Power flips endure when they normalize decency. Dean's refusal to monetize the moment protected its authenticity. In that protection, change took root. The antagonist, if there was one, wasn't a person, it was habit. Habit resists change fiercely. Some producers bristled, fearing precedent. Dean acknowledged their fear without yielding. He understood systems worry about slippery slopes. He offered a simple boundary: emergencies aren't slippery, they're clear. That clarity diffused tension. Crowds reacted too. Fans approached Dean with quiet gratitude. Crew members thanked him privately. Authority figures softened. The tension that once crackled eased into respect. Dean's demeanor guided the shift. He never claimed moral superiority, he modeled it. When asked later by a reporter if he'd do it again, he answered, "I hope I never have to, but yes." That honesty resonated. The confrontation phase ended not with victory laps but with acceptance. The power dynamic settled into a new equilibrium. Stuntmen felt seen. Stars felt responsible. That night became a reference point. Remember when Dean stopped the show? People said, as shorthand for choosing right over routine. The genius reaction had rewritten a rule. Privately, Dean visited the stuntmen during recovery. They talked about work, about fear, about families. No cameras, no scripts. The stuntman confessed he'd almost skipped the job that night, feeling off. Dean listened, not judging. "We all ignore instincts sometimes," he said. They shook hands, a simple ritual sealing gratitude. Dean arranged a fund quietly, ensuring bills were covered. He asked for no recognition. The aftermath mattered more than the moment. He wanted the man to heal without anxiety. That follow-through cemented trust. The truth emerged fully. The stoppage wasn't a publicity reflex, it was character. Word reached John Wayne, a man who respected courage without fuss. Wayne had seen real risk on sets. He understood the unglamorous bravery of stepping in. He called Dean. Their conversation was brief. Wayne said, "You did right." Coming from him, that meant something. Dean thanked him and changed the subject. He didn't collect praise, he collected outcomes. The stuntman eventually returned to work, with accommodations. Safety meetings referenced the incident. The private aftermath rippled outward, steady and lasting. When the story finally reached the wider press, it carried restraint. No embellishment. Facts spoke. Authority figures who'd braced for backlash found themselves applauded for pausing. Tension broke across the industry. A shared exhale. People realized decency hadn't destroyed anything. It had strengthened trust. Crowds responded similarly. Viewers wrote about feeling respected as adults, not manipulated by spectacle. Dean's reputation shifted subtly. The label of careless faded, replaced by something quieter, dependable. That shift mattered more than headlines. The antagonist, habit, lost ground. The crowd reaction validated the choice. Silence had spoken louder than any monologue. Dean watched the change without commentary. He returned to work, carrying the lesson forward. Authority now listened when he paused. That's how power flips stick through repeated proof. The tension that once threatened to define him resolved into clarity. He hadn't stopped a show. He'd started a conversation. John Wayne later told friends the same thing he told Dean. That's what a man does. Coming from a symbol of rugged authority, the endorsement carried weight. It reframed heroism away from stunts toward stewardship. The crowd's understanding matured. Courage wasn't crashing through doors. It was opening space for care. The authority reaction finalized the shift. Networks updated emergency protocols. Unions negotiated better protections. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. Dean never referenced the night onstage again. He let the lesson live independently. That restraint preserved its power. Tension broke fully when people realized the machine could pause and still function. Humanity hadn't broken television, it had improved it. Dean's role receded into the background, where he preferred it. Legends don't always shout their origin stories. Sometimes they let others tell them. Years later, Dean received a letter from the stuntman. It described a life rebuilt, gratitude undimmed. "You saw me," it read. That line stayed with Dean. Being seen is often the difference between survival and erasure. They met once more, older, slower, smiling. No cameras, just shared memory. The handshake lingered. The truth was simple: one pause changed a trajectory. Not just a life but a culture. Dean didn't frame it that way. He framed it as luck meeting choice. He'd been in the right place with the courage to stop. That humility kept the story honest. The private aftermath closed gently without fanfare. Dean returned to his routines, carrying a quiet certainty that when the moment came, he'd chosen correctly. Confession came unexpectedly during a late-night conversation with a friend. Dean admitted he'd been afraid. "I thought I might lose everything," he said. The friend nodded. "Courage isn't absence of fear. It's action in spite of it." That admission completed the arc. The truth wasn't that Dean was fearless. It was that he valued life over image. That value guided him long after the cameras stopped. Stories spread, softened by time, sharpened by respect. Each retelling emphasized the pause, the silence, the hand on a shoulder. Those details endured because they felt real. They were. Legend coda followed naturally. When young performers asked about professionalism, veterans told the story. "Remember Dean," they said. The quote that lasted wasn't clever. It was practical. "We'll wait." Waiting became shorthand for doing the right thing. The moral settled quietly. Power means responsibility, and dignity often needs a pause. John Wayne's word hero stuck not because it was loud, but because it fit. Dean Martin didn't save a show that night. He saved something more fragile. And the industry was better for it. Stories like this remind us that real courage is often quiet. If this moved you, like the video, subscribe for more true legends, and comment below. When have you seen someone pause everything to do the right thing?